Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the Gospel of John. We're still looking at John chapter 4, the conversation Jesus has with this Samaritan woman. We've already seen that as Jesus begins to talk with her about water, he tells her, if you asked of me, I would give you living water, and you would never thirst again. Of course, she doesn't understand that Jesus is speaking about spiritual reality. She's wondering, how can you give me that kind of water? Now let's pick up the reading at verse 15. The woman said to Jesus, Sir, give me this water, so that I will not get thirsty and have to keep coming back to this well in order to draw more water. Not understanding there's a spiritual reality being discussed, she thinks if you could give me water I never thirst again, I could save myself the trouble of coming to this well. Jesus has to lead her slowly to understand what's going on. So he begins to talk about her past life and her need for the grace of God. So Jesus says to her, Go and call your husband and come back. I have no husband, she replied. Jesus says to her, You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you've just said is quite true. Now, Jesus reveals to her that he has insight into her life. He knows the wreck that her life has become. Now, we don't know all the backstory, but we know that if she had had 5 husbands, and she's now living with a man who is not her husband, that her life has become a tragedy. We don't know what caused it, but we know it has been a tragedy. The very fact that she's living with a 6th man, she's had 5 husbands and now just living with a man, in the society of this time would make her an outcast and on the fringes of society. She has a very hard life, obviously. Jesus sees this. Now she realizes, son, I'm not just talking to any ordinary guy. I'm not sure all this, what he's saying about living water, but he knows my past, and he shouldn't. He knows my story, and he should not. There must be something very special about this man. So she says, Yes, I can see, sir, that you are a prophet. Now, when she labels him a prophet, she is recognizing that he's from God. He's a spokesman of the Lord. She doesn't know much about him, but she knows he is speaking with insight from God. That's what a prophet does. I can see you are a prophet. So let me ask you about religion. Now, our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. What is all this about the places of worship? Well, you remember the Samaritans are descendants of northern Israel. Way back centuries before, when the nation of Israel split into 2 parts, there was Judah in the south and Israel in the north. Israel would later disappear, conquered by the Assyrians, and the people of northern Israel that were left, over a period of time, intermarried with non-Israelite people or pagan people, and the Samaritans were the result. Now, as a result of that, Samaritans were not welcome to worship in Jerusalem at the Temple of Solomon. So at some point in their history, the Samaritans had built their own temple, a rival temple to the one in Jerusalem. It was built on the mountain that this Samaritan woman is referring to, Mount Gerizim. So the Samaritans had worshiped at their own temple on Mount Gerizim, which was a rival temple to Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. But a couple of centuries before the New Testament time, the temple on Mount Gerizim had been destroyed. It had been destroyed by the Jews, by the way. That's another story. But anyway, it had been destroyed. But the Samaritans, though they no longer had that temple, they still looked upon Mount Gerizim as their place of worship. So since this Samaritan woman realizes that Jesus is a prophet, she asked him the religious question that is uppermost in the minds of Samaritans: where should you worship? Should you worship God as we do on Mount Gerizim, or should we go to Jerusalem and worship in the temple, even though they know they're not welcome there? Isn't it interesting that she's really diverting the question from herself and the tragedy of her life and how something needs to happen there to a question about places and locales of worship? She has an interest in the things of God. She wants to know what the proper locale for worship is. But she's not really interested in what God can do for her to transform her life and to redeem her life from the tragedy it has become. Indeed, her life is tragic. It has become a wreck, and she knows it. But rather than turning to God and seeking His transforming power, the living water Jesus had already spoken of, she's all interested in the rituals and the protocols and the locations of worship. So since you're a prophet, tell me, where is the proper location of worship? Now, in tomorrow's session, we're going to see how Jesus responds and talks to her about the location of worship. And again, he's going to say, it's not so much physical location, but it's a spiritual reality, a spiritual location. We'll talk about that tomorrow. So join us next time for our 5-minute Bible study in the Gospel of John.